To our Getting Hybrid Work Right series. We meet every other Thursday at this time, 11 a.m. Eastern US time. Today, we're going to be focusing on workplace design and its impact on employee well-being with a couple of outstanding guests that we have, which I'll be introducing to you all in just a moment. For those of you that maybe are joining us for the first time or otherwise not as familiar with who I4CP is, we are the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We discover the people practices that drive high performance. We do this by conducting really more human capital research than anyone else out there, but also by providing opportunities like this call. We have exchange groups on a variety of topics. We have our invite-only board groups. We have flash calls. So really peer connections is another thing that we provide the HR and human capital community in addition to all of the research. Our research is very focused on what high-performing organizations do more than their low-performing counterparts. You see the definition of that there in the top right: revenue growth, market share, profitability, customer satisfaction, the four criteria that we use to define what high performance is. And we're always looking for what we like to call next practices, those things that go beyond best practices that high-performing organizations are doing, but that are not really widespread yet. Sometimes best practices are things that a lot of companies are already doing. Still good to report on, but we're really looking around the corner at those next practices. We are a member-driven organization. You see here just a small sample of our outstanding member organizations. We're adding new members all the time. We've grown so much in the past 3 years, it feels like we're adding new members every week. So we'll probably be updating this slide as time goes by to give some logo attention to some additional companies, but you see some great organizations that are members today. If your organization isn't a member, but you think you should be, or you might be interested, by all means, reach out to myself, Kevin Oakes, who is my co-host on this call, always interested in hearing from potential members as well. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
We have these calls, as I said, every other Thursday, the Getting Hybrid Work Right series. You can see our next one will be on April 14th, where we'll be joined by Jody Rabinowitz, who's the head of talent at Zoom, the product we're currently using, the one and the same Zoom that we host these calls in. On alternating weeks, we have some what we call Next Practice monthly calls, which are calls that are more focused on other topics besides hybrid work. So for example, next week we just announced this edition of the guest Cheryl Kern from Miller Knoll, which you may not be familiar with that name, Miller Knoll. That's the updated name from the merger of Herman Miller and Knoll Corporation. She's the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She'll be joining us next Thursday. And then after that, on the 21st, we'll be focused on talent acquisition. We have other calls in this series, one for talent and learning professionals. Wanted to highlight the one we had with that group last week. We were joined by 3 individuals, including the global head of talent, Allison Horn from Accenture, a massive organization with 700,000 employees. They let us know that last fiscal year, they hired 120,000 individuals and 54,000 in the fourth quarter alone. So you can imagine that onboarding, particularly during these times, has been a real challenge for them. And one of the things that they've done for onboarding and other use cases as well is start to use virtual reality. And so that's what we focused on last week. You see 3 avatars there in their One Accenture Park virtual reality space. I am up there in the top left, wearing my lovely Oculus headset for about half of the call. And so we were able to not only talk about the benefits of virtual reality, but also demo a live demo of their space. And that was certainly one of the more interesting calls we've had. Like all the calls in our Thursday series, we record these. And so you can go out to our website, watch the recording if virtual reality, like for most of us, including me, is still relatively new.
And I lost a bet. I was certain that Tom was going to fall off his chair during this VR simulation, but he stayed upright. And I got to commend you, Tom, for doing a great job on that call.
Yeah, thank you. I had certainly some prep time with them, and not only fall off my chair in physical space, but there's, we're on a walkway there. There's a waterfall that you can see off in the distance. There was the chance my avatar was going to get soaked, but I made it through unscathed. So things worked out. Wanted to just touch note before we introduce our guests and get into the meat of our session today. We obviously, a lot of our research that we conduct at I4CP is member only. That's sort of our business model, if you will. But we do often put out briefs with some of the key findings of our research more open to the public. And our latest study, called the Talent Imperative, which we did in partnership with Fortune magazine, really had some very interesting findings on what's going on with talent today, the so-called Great Resignation, all the folks leaving their work, hybrid work, all of the above, really. And so there is a brief that's available out at our website. You see the URL there in the bottom right. We'll make sure to get that into the chat. You can download this brief, and then more findings will be available for our members as we dig deeper into the data. Kevin, I know you had the chance to interview Alan Murray from Fortune magazine at our conference a couple weeks ago. Anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, I've had several conversations with Alan. He's the CEO of Fortune, and they're doing a great job from the CEO perspective of trying to look at what is the world of work going to be going forward. And so we partnered up on this study and hopefully more in the future, just really trying to figure out how companies should respond to what we see as a very interesting time period right now when it comes to talent. Unemployment is at 50-year lows right now. And at the same time, the quit rates are as high as they've ever been, based on when they were even starting to be tracked by BLS and others. And so there's a number of different strategies that I think organizations are using in order to both retain and attract talent. We've had a lot of conversation around internal talent marketplaces and creating a skills database, because many times when companies have job openings, the best talent is right under their nose, but they don't know it. And so these are some of the things that we've tackled with the Talent Imperative and some of our other research work. And so if that is of interest to you, certainly let us know. Be happy to share more with you about what we're finding.
Yep, absolutely. We've been focused on this since really quite early in the pandemic, and we just keep continuing to build on with one study after another. All right, with that all said, without any further ado, let's introduce today's guests. I want to welcome Caitlin McKenna, Global Head of Human-centric Innovation, and Melissa Walker, Senior Director, Wellbeing Product Manager, again, of Human-centric Innovation at JLL Corporation. So welcome, Caitlin and Melissa.
Thank you, and appreciate you having us here. Thank you.
Great to have you. This came about because you, Caitlin, were sort of featured in a research brief that we did. My colleague Carol Morrison, I believe, was the one that interviewed you and featured JLL and the work that you're doing in the brief that you see there at the right. Let's kick things off if we could. Could you tell us a little bit, there's a description there of JLL on the screen, but in your own words, maybe tell us a little bit about JLL and your role and Melissa's role at the organization.
Absolutely, and welcome everyone. Hi, I'm really pleased to be with you here today and share this next hour with you. Kevin and Tom, lovely to have your time as well, and appreciate the partnership for this opportunity. Like Tom and Kevin said, my role is Global Head of Human-centered Innovation, and we've got Melissa here too, who is our well-being expert on the team. Melissa and I sit in a really unique vertical of JLL, which is known as work dynamics. And this means that we enable large, complex organizations and their work and their workplaces and their workforces to achieve a more human-centric, more resilient, more responsible real estate offering. And this means as a team, we spend our time just focusing on building solutions of a human-centered nature that help move companies into the future. We all know that the world of work is evolving at a clip that is way faster than we've ever anticipated. We're coming off the heels of a taxing and very trying time. And when we think about net new services to help our clients, it's Melissa and I and our team's responsibility to produce those services with the people first mentality. And our focus, as Melissa and I here today, our focus is really around helping people flourish, helping them feel happy, healthy, and high performing. And this means at work and everywhere in between. So we happen to work with a beautiful team of ethnographers who study people, and they are passionate advocates of people, first and foremost, from a most authentic way. And above all else, we know that people first is how we're going to help the future of work. So that's our focus. We do not sit in human resources, though we liaise with them, and we liaise with all companies in their human resource cohorts and teams, both heads of corporate real estate, heads of human resources, heads of IT, and in some cases, a lot of new positions that are emerging to support the future world of work. So that's what we do, and we're delighted to be here with you today to talk about all that is hybrid and the future of work.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, Caitlin. I've known about JLL as a company for really my whole work life, known that you're in corporate real estate. Obviously, a company your size would have a sizable HR department, but I wouldn't have guessed until learning this just recently from you all that you would have the sort of team and division that the two of you are a part of, the sort of human-centric side. And I'm assuming that predated the pandemic, the sort of human-centric approach, but I'm sure it's gotten turbocharged with everything going on most recently.
Yeah, and it has. I've been now here at JLL for 2.5 years. Previously, Melissa and I actually worked at another organization where we focused on experience development, more so in the hospitality space. The common thread in our world has always been wellness. When you think about people, and really what helps people flourish in life and elsewhere, it's all around the epitome of well-being and designing well-being opportunities for people. So we moved over to JLL, and at the time, of course, human-centered conversations were a hot topic, and we did feel and we have felt for the past decade of our life that nothing is more important for us as professionals, but as organizations, to care more about their people than anything else. But certainly, as the pandemic has continued and as it will continue, it's really interesting and fun to watch all that we've believed in kind of come to the forefront in everyone else's mind too. It's a critical time to get it right. And the cool part is we don't have to be perfect. We just have to try, and we have to put the efforts out there to make it a better environment and a better place for people to work. And while employees are expecting more from their employer, it's not about perfection. It's about the demonstration of care. And so I think in this conversation today, you'll see that come through. And so for us, it's just been a really interesting time to see all this conversation amplified. And now we get to do something really cool with it. So yeah, it's a great point.
So it's one of the things we wanted to hit on here. You talk about perfection not always being reachable, but largely getting things right. And JLL certainly did that. You were one of the finalists for the I4CP Next Practices Award, which again, the conference that I alluded to earlier, where Kevin was interviewing Alan Murray, and we had lots of other great speakers. You were one of the finalists, JLL was, for that award, and that was for your corporate workplace re-entry strategy. Unlike a lot of companies, including presumably many represented on the call today, JLL has been back in the office for quite some time, but you did that with a lot of intentionality. I had to write them all down, all the elements of your back to work strategy, creating an employee resource center, a re-entry playbook, socially distanced floor plans involving new technology in the process, FAQ resources. I mean, the list goes on. And I don't want to steal your thunder, because I'd really love to hear from you what that process was like, what process you followed, and some of the critical elements.
Yeah, I think the official start, the official re-entry, so to speak, date for us was roundly April of 2021, if I have my years right. And it was certainly sooner than I think other organizations in some cases were prepared to go back to work. But as you can imagine, we are commercial real estate leaders. Our business is based on people being in the built environment, right? So for us, we needed to get it right, and we needed to make sure that what we were doing for our own employees was also applicable for our clients. So we knew the focus needed to be on employee well-being, and not just employee safety and security. That's table stakes, right? A lot of the conversations earlier on were just really around sanitization and making sure that the environment was clean and safe. But we knew that we needed to make sure that it was well-being was the center of it all. So when we began to put together our program and process, we focused on a number of key things. First, I'll say that we built a cross-functional group, a reentry committee. And I believe other companies have done similar things, but we had a robust set of individuals who represented health and safety, human resources, legal, commercial real estate, marketing, and so on. And this committee was literally the army of individuals whose job every single day was to wake up, build the reentry policies and processes, and helping people simplify work and getting back to work when the rest of the world felt a bit chaotic. And so I'll list off a few of the things that came out of this particular group of individuals. Obvious things like COVID tracking, that I think most companies adopted such a thing, but this was really around helping leaders make decisions around when to open and close offices more in a real-time manner. We obviously built a suite of contact tracing mechanisms, and then we also offered similar things for our clients who needed similar tools. We built a COVID resource center, and this was a body that housed reference material, and it had an interesting feature that was all around real-time employee sentiment capture. So we had a pulse survey built in where people can literally just give their sentiment for the day, and we knew how people were feeling in addition to who was well and unwell. We had basic things like a re-entry playbook that was very robust, and it was guiding principles. It was opening and closing criteria. It had local nuance, of course, depending on the reader and where they sat, so that there was the right communications, the right safety measures, and so forth for that particular locale and jurisdiction. We obviously followed the basic things like social distancing and so forth. But one of the really interesting things for us was a campaign called Taking Care of You. And it was our demonstration and acknowledgement of this work-life balance challenge that we're all trying to persevere through. And it focused on things like expanded caregiving support. It offered up resources for those who happen to even be struggling to pay bills. And it was a microsite that addressed key issues that were outside of work, because now we know that work and life are literally one and the same. So, a lot of things that we heard in these pulse surveys and through sentiment capture was, I want to keep learning. I feel a bit of a disconnect between my teams and so forth. I'm not sure what this virtual world will feel and look like for me in my career. And so we even did things like virtual learning opportunities, where we had 15,000 courses that we offered our employee base, and much more. So it was a robust set of activities, of which included an external marketing campaign too, called Step Forward. And it was around our response to reentry and all that we're doing for our employees and the examples of what we are up to. And I think one of the coolest outcomes of this particular response was, number one, extreme mitigation of any transmission of COVID. But I think more importantly, what was cool was things like the growth and opportunity that our employees had during that time. There was 40,000 JLL virtual learning courses taken. There was 10,000 unique visitations to the JLL Hub. And by the way, these stats that I'm sharing with you right now are just of the Americas, so let alone the entire globe. There was about 8,000 hours spent focusing on mental health and physical and financial well-being, and much more. So we found that this time became an opportunity for many, and there was not one single COVID outbreak in any JLL corporate office. Only transmissions happened within the community. So we feel it was a successful process and program. And we've been able to share that with our clients who have learned and are on a similar journey to making sure that as they bring people back, may it be in full, hybrid, or anything in between, they're in good hands, and their employees will be better off because of it.
And Caitlin, we've done a lot of research on employee sentiment and the best way to gather that. It sounds like you were doing very frequent pulse surveys, or was it an always-on technology that you were using to gather that sentiment?
We were using pulse surveys. However, we did a multitude of things. And what was interesting, and I'll let Melissa kind of talk to this a little bit, but during this time, we also spent time doing real research on ourselves. We actually were putting wearables on us. We were doing things that were literally beyond pulse surveys, beyond sentiment surveys, we were literally testing people's biometrics to see how they were feeling and how what we were doing was helping them navigate and feel better at work. And in this case, we happened to be home. In some cases we were in the office, and in other places. So Melissa, if you wouldn't mind, I think it would be cool to talk a little bit about the biometric testing that we did to help our employees navigate a tougher time.
Sure. So we were very curious about a couple things. We wanted to better understand some of the tools that we were rolling out and devising for clients. And of course, we always try to test our own solutions on ourselves first. And so we had been piloting a program called Experience Anywhere. And Experience Anywhere is a hybrid solution that helps connect employees no matter where they work. And there's a variety of components within that tool, including well-being, productivity solutions, social events to keep people connected. And we were testing this, and we were also theorizing on a lot of other concepts around wellness. So we worked with a company called Art Health, and we will be publishing a paper around this in the next couple of months. We're still putting the final touches on it. But what we did is we collected a group of volunteers, and we grouped them into three component parts of the study. One group was our control group. We had a second group that received the resources from Experience Anywhere, but did not have the feedback loop from the wearable. And then we had another group that had the wearable plus access to the tool. We baselined everyone for a month and got their baseline results, and then we implemented the solutions. And it was just phenomenal to see some of the results of this study. And we were looking at this from three perspectives. We were looking at their cognitive performance, and we measured this using an app called Omnix, which is literally brain games that people would use and take after doing a meditation, after taking a walk, after doing some deep breathing. Then we were testing their emotional well-being through surveys, asking them, what did you participate in? How did it make you feel? What were some of the results of having these tools and resources? And then we were looking at the true biometric data of how many steps were you taking? We were looking at their sleep. We were looking at heart rate variability, which is a proxy measure for stress. Everything was anonymized. We didn't know any individual results, but collectively, across almost 300 people, we were able to gather information and get some really interesting insights about how people were feeling, how often were they able to take breaks, were there particular nuances between the types of jobs people did, between individual contributors versus leaders and executives. And it was really our first opportunity to dig a little deeper into actual physical results versus just doing the surveys. And it has some really powerful outcomes that we're going to be excited to share with you all soon.
And Melissa, was there anything that surprised you as you dove into those findings?
Yes, I mean, across the board, the two groups that received the resources reported better results in cognition, working memory, all the positive emotions, feeling cared for, Feeling happy went up. The negative emotions of stress and anxiety went down. We did find, interestingly, that, and maybe not surprisingly, that the home-based workers didn't walk and get as many steps as those that came into the office. So there, is some thinking around how do we support home workers to ensure that they're able to get the same activity levels. They're not walking from the train to the office. They may not be walking around the office, their home as much as they would in the office. So that was a finding. We also learned that managers and executives are not taking breaks. They are working full tilt, 8+ hours a day, and they reported clearly that that is having an impact on their mental well-being. And so one of the suggestions or conclusions that we're working on is how do we potentially support managers and executives differently maybe than individual contributors, because we definitely saw a difference in the number of breaks. The ability to turn off of work at the end of the day was different for individual contributors. They had an easier time doing that than people who manage people or are at the executive level.
Yeah, sometimes I long for 8-hour days. Those seem to be far and few between for me anyway.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of questions that came in through the chat. One was just, what was the name of the health company that you worked with?
Yep, it's a partnership we have with ART, A-R-T Health, H-E-A-L-T-H, ART Health.
Okay. And then is the data from a system or a specific team within the organization? And it sounded like it was from the system.
Yeah, I mean, we recruited people across the organization. It was all volunteers. So it was, we put out the opportunity to participate to a pool of around 1,500 people. Our goal was to get a minimum of 200 people recruited, which we did achieve. So they were randomly, we randomly sent it out to 1,400, but they did volunteer to be part of the study.
Yeah, that's good, because obviously maybe some individuals might not want particularly the biometric stuff, even though it was anonymized and everything. Some folks might not have wanted that. So great that it was volunteer. We just had one more question came in. Catherine says that she respects and applauds this work. Could you expand on the on-the-job sort of work time commitment that was allotted by managers for people to be involved with this? I mean, I'm assuming it probably wasn't a huge time commitment, but they had to report their information presumably, so it took some time.
Yeah, we didn't exactly tell people how much they could engage in the tool. The tool is the Experience Anywhere Hub, which is a resource platform for well-being, productivity, events. So that was completely self-selected. They could participate in that as much or as little as they wanted. The requirements were they needed to keep their wearable connected to the platform so that we could collect their biometric data. So they agreed to do that, and we would check in on that regularly. They did an Omnix test at least once a week, but they could do it every day. And it was interesting how people really enjoyed watching their own performance improve over time as they did some of this brain training. And then the other piece was the surveys, which we did once per week. So it was actually a pretty minimal time requirement. I would say probably the actual tasks that they did, less than 30 minutes a week.
Yeah, and I can just add a little color to that too. I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding with what it takes and how much time you need to take to feel better. And it's not about the hour and 90-minute, power hour where you're hustling on a Peloton necessarily. It literally could be a 2-minute, 5-minute meditation or get up and walk around. And so some of the activities that we offer in the hub are literally 5, 10, 15-minute activities that just allow you to take a respite from the intensity of the day. And so even the participation, like Melissa said, where we're asking people to respond and take a moment from their day to help us on this study were one thing, but the activities themselves are really simple and not terribly time consuming. And that's a learning I think a lot of people need to understand, is that well-being is very manageable at work and throughout the workday, and won't necessarily take away from the workday, rather make it better.
One of the things I wanted to note is actually along the lines of one of the questions here we just got in the chat from Andrea. She's wondering, how will this data, these findings be communicated to your own employees to sort of change behavior going forward? And my angle on that was, it's one thing to have a resource center that's available to employees where they can pull from, but are you going to look to nudges and things like that? A lot of companies are using nudges for behavior change in a lot of different ways, well-being included. So curious how you're going to communicate this per Andrea's question, and then whether or not nudges are part of the strategy.
That is a great segue, I think, into some of what we were going to talk about next, Tom. You know, it is very important not to just do research for the sake of research, right? And I have been involved in a variety of research platforms across my career, and I wholeheartedly agree that it does very little good to just simply state, you know, people aren't taking breaks or people aren't doing this without having subsequent discussions around culture, policy, leadership, enablement. All those things are so utterly important for the adoption of wellness. And you know, we've seen a lot of people invest in beautiful spaces. They, you know, will engage in purchasing a digital platform for the purposes of well-being, and then they fail simply because they don't consider how the everyday contributor needs to understand and hear on a regular basis from leadership and from their organization that they are allowed to participate and use the space and use the resources given. It is so essential. So in the example of our own findings, that managers and executives are not personally taking care of themselves, not doing those sips of wellness throughout the day. I mean, that's very concerning, right? Because if they're not, then they're probably not communicating to their own employees that they should be. And so it's a ripple effect that has profound impact. And so I think, you know, a big part of what we're working on this year is expanding the definition of holistic well-being. One of the, I know you shared with us that, you know, your 6 areas of physical, mental, financial, career, community, and social are kind of like the pillars of wellness that you look at. And I think that's a great achievement in the past 20 years, because I know at the beginning of my career, when we spoke about wellness, it was mostly around nutrition and physical activity. And there was very little understanding that there were, you know, profound impacts from other areas of our life. And now I think that definition needs to expand again, because when we talk about holistic well-being, we aren't just talking about programs or disease management or, you know, digital platforms. We're also talking about spaces. We're talking about culture. We're talking about leadership modeling. We're talking about policies, deliberate policies that state clearly that employees can participate, that it's expected that people participate. And as a personal example, we just finished doing our own 2022 objectives, you know, performance objectives. And for our wellness team, we included an objective around well-being, where we will personally measure and hold each other accountable to ensure that I, as a leader, am modeling well-being behavior, and that I'm enabling that same behavior of my direct reports, and that my direct reports understand that this is something that I want them to do, is to take care of themselves. And I think that's just a really important piece of that holistic conversation that we need to push.
Yeah, I sorry, I just want to, I practically sprained my neck nodding in affirmation when you said the word modeling, because earlier you said, you know, leaders, if they're not doing it themselves, then they're probably not communicating. And to me, that, you know, being a great leader, even being a great manager of people, involves both communicating explicitly, but also modeling, because otherwise your actions aren't matching your words. People might hear what the manager is saying, assume that it maybe they got coached to say that by HR or whatever, but then if they're not doing it themselves, taking PTO, taking vacation time, doing whatever mental and emotional stress relievers are best for them. And of course, that varies from person to person. But if they're not both communicating it explicitly, the principles and the reasons behind it, and modeling it, then people might look at that askance or with a skeptical eye. So I'm so glad you mentioned both aspects of that. And I want to give just a quick kudos to our own leadership team here at I4CP. We're a small company, about 50 employees. Kevin Oakes is our CEO, but the rest of our senior team, they've done actually a really great job of modeling. I'll take the example of PTO and vacation time. That's something that I think a lot of people throughout 2020 weren't very good at taking during the early days of the pandemic. But since then, I have seen to a person all of our leaders taking the PTO and the vacation time that they should, and that starts at the top with you, Kevin. So just applaud you for doing that, disconnecting when you need to, and really modeling that behavior.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I also put in the chat just some links for members. I'm unsure if some non-members can see some of this information to our well-being series, which this report that we're showing on the screen comes from. But we have a number of other assets that go into that well-being series, one of which is an ongoing group that we have as part of our exchanges, which is our well-being exchange. And Carrie Bevis has been very involved in running that, as well as some of our members as well. So just want to mention that, Tom, for our members on the line.
Yeah, I appreciate that for the members on the line. I will note, though, that if memory serves, the report you see there, the Next Practices in Holistic Wellbeing, was one of those rare major studies that we did make available to the public. And so if you search on that at the I4CP website, even as a non-member, you should be able to locate and download it. It's a big read. The data from it, I should note that I'm showing here on the screen, and all the data in that report comes from just before the pandemic. However, we did do some follow-up pulse surveys. And so one thing I can note, for example, the data that's shown here for social relational well-being, that sort of was the least commonly emphasized by both high-performing and low-performing organizations, although you can see the big gap there between high performers and low performers. During the pandemic, during these 2+ years, that has shot way up in terms of organizations emphasizing social and relational well-being, as has emotional and mental health. That came in sort of a close fourth here. I'm pretty sure at this point that's a rocketed up to being second at least on this list. All right, I'd love to pivot if we could, given that JLL, and your customers are focused on real estate and on workplaces and workplace design. Let's, if we could bring up the poll, Zeta, do you have this poll available?
There it is. Just came up, Tom.
Just came up, great. So we'd love to hear from folks, and then we'll pivot back to Caitlin and Melissa. By the end of this year, so looking ahead to the end of 2022, what do you anticipate your office space or overall corporate footprint will look like compared with pre-pandemic 2019? Is it going to be more? And if so, why? There's two different responses for more. Is it going to be less? And then we've got two different responses for less. Less or more from growth, or less or more from the shift in usage? Or is it going to be about the same, do you think? Again, not right now necessarily, but looking at the end of this year. We'll give everyone another couple of minutes to answer this poll. A lot of responses coming in, so appreciate that. All right, they're slowing to a trickle. So let's go ahead and end the poll and share out the results. And I'd love to get the response from all three of you, Kevin, Caitlin, Melissa, to this. It looks like about the same square footage is the number one response, but followed very quickly by less, primarily because of a shift to more remote and certainly going forward, at least a lot more hybrid work, and then much smaller numbers for the other three responses. What are your thoughts on this?
I just closed out the numbers, so I might forget them and have to reference them again, but none of it surprises me. There is no one size fits all, right? Every organization has different goals, different cultures, different approaches to real estate and its impact on those things, right? But what I will say is there what we're hearing a lot of is the way in which you will use the space will change. So forget the portfolio, whether you'll upsize, downsize, and that will vary. We just saw that in the survey. The way in which people will use the space is going to differ. I think heading into the office is a more deliberate activity. It's an opportunity to collaborate. You might not need more or less space to do it, but you're going to perhaps repurpose some of your space to support those interactions. When people do go into the office, they're going to want to go into the office to be with specific people. They don't want to just go there and be isolated by themselves in a cubicle, for example. They need to go and have a reason to go, which means either to have a meeting, to have a moment for collaboration, socialization, et cetera. So none of this stuff is new and monumental for the audience here. I think we all know that. But what we've also learned, and Melissa can chime in here too, is companies desire to rethink their spaces because of these changes and because the use of the space is different. They're trying to figure out how to create destination spaces, provide the right sized and right set of amenities. And speaking of well-being, to support collaboration, to support high performance, less so to maybe serve the heads down work that would normally occur in the place of work. So we're working a lot with our clients right now to figure out what that equation looks like. And we have a number of new services actually that we offer and are offering our clients to build out an appropriate place of work that suits new activities. And that ranges from different food and beverage, different types of meeting and event spaces, different wellness zones and wellness spaces. We actually have a service called Experience Space, and as the name suggests, it's literally all around serving the human within the workplace. And because our team happens to be ethnographers and we focus on what the human wants and how they need to interface with it, but we're also dealing with clients who are a little apprehensive around investing in space renovations and complete overhauls. We're trying to support clients in an iterative trial and test type manner and in a way that doesn't completely expend capitally, overextend capitally. So Melissa, you could probably chime in too. I don't want to take up the whole microphone here, but on some of the other design components that are influencing.
I think there's some really good nuggets that we discovered in the process of writing our well-being white paper, which you guys can access on our website. It's free to the public. And what we were looking at in this work, and this includes, this was kind of part one of the overall effort that we were looking at in terms of what does new space need to look like? What are people wanting to come back to the office? And we found it's not just about amenities. It's not about just getting free food. I mean, those are and can and are being used as carrots, but space is really a proxy for culture. And, people want to feel, and what they've been missing with, the pandemic and working from home is that culture has been, in some instances, a bit diluted. So when they come back into the office, they really want to feel like they're in that space and that their space speaks to the company in which they work for. So really looking at the, interior design, what is the culture of the organizations, and really improving that, the space to accommodate the fact that people have spent the last 2 years customizing the way they work. They have been in complete control of what they wear, what they eat, whether they're working from a desk or maybe they move outside for part of the day. They've had ultimate flexibility to design their way of work in the past 2 years. And that provides an extreme amount of anxiety to people when they feel like they have to give that up. And so this linear way of thinking about work, that you come in and that you sit at a cubicle for 8 hours and maybe you take a lunch break, is just something that we have to move away from if we want to support the mental well-being, emotional well-being of the workforce. And so what we're really seeing is that there needs to be kind of an ebb and flow within the office space where, yes, in one day you may do multiple things. You may need space to do some heads down work like reply to emails, but then you're also going to want to be able to go and collaborate with your colleagues. It's also going to be probably important that you do some nice wellness breaks and maybe get some natural movement into your day. So it's really about recognizing that work is not linear any longer and that people's energy levels ebb and flow and that the space needs to accommodate that. So a great example of this is often people will engage in a digital platform for meditation. And they give this resource to employees, but in the office, where are they supposed to do that? Are they going to sit in the middle of the office space and begin meditating? Most people wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. So what are you providing from a space perspective to allow people to get away, to focus on a meditation or a deep breathing, or in some instances, how can you get away from technology altogether? So you go to a tech-free zone where you just are allowed to just stop and breathe for a few moments without getting pinged on, chat or getting interrupted. So it's really about looking at the ebb and flow of how people work, the fact that our energy levels are up and down, our circadian rhythms change hour to hour, and how do we design that space to accommodate that new way of work?
And Melissa, it's interesting to hear you talk about the meditation areas. I'm an advisor to a company called Sanctuary, which has been taking over some conference rooms and turning them into yoga or Tai Chi rooms for organizations. And basically what you have at the far end of the room is a big video wall, and it's a virtual yoga session. Which I think is, we'll see more and more of that kind of thing, I think, in organizations as we pay more attention to well-being and as we think about how to be more creative in using that space that companies have.
I agree. Yep, for sure.
And, it's interesting we were just looking at Mumbai and your office there. I've counseled many folks, and I talked to the CEO of MasterCard about this, that in many organizations, the office is the respite. A lot of times, individuals trying to work at home don't have a great home setup, right? So they need that office in order to be productive, which, I don't want to lose sight of that. We're big fans of flexible and hybrid work here. But, for many, that flexibility means give me the space that I need to be productive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so. And that you're right. It's very regionally specific in some cases. It's generationally specific. It's personality specific, neurodiversity specific. And so we have a really interesting opportunity to look at all those cross sections right now and try to accommodate people and all of their unique characteristics in themselves and in the life around them. And that's a challenge, but I think we're slowly cracking that nut. The fact that everyone here is on a call today thinking about the same things for the first time ever in my own personal career forever is a testament to our ability to reach that goal.
And Caitlin and Melissa, I'd be curious how you're thinking about hybrid meetings. I think this is going to be something we talk a lot about going forward in the next few years, and people are struggling with it right now. Trying to have meetings where you've got some people in person, some people remote. It gets very kludgy in almost everyone that I've ever been in. I'm curious how you're thinking about that.
Well, you just made me think of a recent meeting where we were flying out to meet with clients, only to discover that the clients were virtual. It's sort of like how everyone gets to do their own thing. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, technology, and great technology, is an absolute must. So I think we're going to start seeing technology companies really get creative and provide better technologies. One of the things that we're actually doing right now, we're renovating a number of offices of our own. Some individuals on our team, we're very focused on the technology and making sure that the experience, regardless of where you are, is suitable and not just suitable, but fantastic. So that's one thing we need to focus on. I think there's going to be some perhaps rules set around what constitutes an in-person versus a virtual opportunity in terms of meetings, and who needs to be there and who doesn't, so that we avoid these types of situations where you get there and no one's there. I think we need to think about things like what equitable looks like for people in the room versus not. FaceTime has always been really important for people. The ability to shake someone's hand, the ability to look in someone's eyes, to connect them on a personal level. That's a very powerful thing. And meetings certainly contribute to better relationships for some, right? And we do know through research and so forth that there's a disconnect in opportunity to some degree for those who happen to remain virtual. So it's a dynamic and complex thing to figure out, I think. But oddly, I think we're figuring out as we go. I think companies are taking a unique approach to meetings by company. And Melissa, without mentioning the name of a company where your significant other works, I'd love for you to share a little bit of the anecdote around how they are approaching meetings and communications and so forth, because I think it shows how futuristic and different companies are thinking about interacting.
Yeah, so I learned from my husband that with his firm, they are pretty much moving away from email. They do almost no communication via email at this point, and their sites are set on the metaverse at some point. But the majority of their communications is done through their chat platform, and the way they set their chats up with the different like search features and I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I mean he gets maybe 3 or 4 emails a day, and emails are meant to be used if you need to get a digital signature. That is like what they're saying, and that's what they've moved to. And it's been really interesting to see his approach to work through almost in a 100% chat environment versus mine, which is still very email heavy.
And that's very provocative. Obviously, companies like software platforms like Teams and Slack and others saw huge growth starting in March of 2020. There were those companies that were already using those and were starting to move away at least some of the email traffic onto them even prior to that. But for most companies, the real growth has happened in the past couple of years. So definitely a very provocative solution or approach that they're pursuing. One other very provocative thing that I wanted to share was one of the guest speakers we had at our conference was Jared Spataro from Microsoft. And he noted, obviously, Microsoft has a lot of technology available for their hybrid meetings. And he said the following, which I just thought was a wonderful line, that for hybrid meetings where you've got some people in person and some people remote, their philosophy is to design the meeting for those not in the room. And I thought that was a very interesting sort of guiding principle, because more often than not, it's the people not in the room in person that are virtual that might be left out of some of the conversation or otherwise ignored. And I think that was far more common, say 5 years ago, than it is today after the pandemic, where we've all had the experience of virtual meetings and have upped our game. But to some extent, that could still slip into happening. And so I love that line, design your meetings for those not in the room, to keep them at the forefront.
And Tom, if I can add something to that, which I find, sometimes people still don't think about, is we were at a recent meeting, and I'm happy to report that the person on our team from Canada who was attending virtually reported that it was great. He had a really good experience, except when it came to the food. He goes, you all got up and had this beautiful buffet of food to eat, and I had to go get my frozen dinner out of my freezer, right? So it's like sometimes we also forget that for particular types of meetings where there may be giveaways or there's, catered food. We don't want to forget our virtual colleagues.
Yeah.
And, perhaps we can leverage, things, to get them a meal like a DoorDash or something like that.
Exactly. And that's something that I think we'll see companies doing more and more of. I've been an advocate of virtual teams and remote work for a couple of decades. And I even gave talks on this in years past at conferences, way before it became as common as it is today. And I had that as a story. There was a company I worked for where we had a couple of remote employees. And so because there was only a couple of people, when they brought the pizza in to the on-site, they'd actually had a local pizza company deliver pizza to the person's door. And it was great knowing that was going to happen. It was great to see those individuals' faces on the call saying, oh, wait, I'm so sorry. The doorbell's ringing. I need to go. And sure enough, it was the food delivery. So there's little things you can do like that can really help morale of those that are remote.
That's great.
In our closing few minutes here, Caitlin, can you just say a few words of what I'm showing on the screen? You've mentioned technology and its role a few times, and this is, I know, one solution JLL makes available to its clients for hoteling.
Absolutely. Yeah, to kind of close out, I'm happy to talk about this. So for companies who are choosing any sort of flexible work patterns for their employees, there are repercussions, of course, to managing that real estate in a sort of seamless manner. So we have a tool that supports, it's called dynamic occupancy planning, and it really takes kind of hoteling to the next level. There's this always on space optimization, if you will. It's a key feature, it's a capability for this tech-enabled managed service. And basically, it's accommodating and using AI to track the daily, weekly, monthly micro demands and fluctuations of people who are coming and going. And by the way, this has never been done in the industry before. As you know, typically occupancy management is very much a clipboard or an Excel sheet or something like that that's tracking people's comings and goings. But the AI really automates the reallocation of space and allows companies to, if we know that the demand is going to be different in a day or an hour, we can close down 3 floors, for example, and only open 1 floor. And from an employee perspective, they can book only on a specific floor or only in specific cubes or conference rooms, et cetera. So it becomes a tool for the occupancy managers, but then as well, and real estate managers, and then a tool obviously for employees to have a better experience. And I think one of the side effects, and wonderful side effects of this service too, is when you think about sustainability, we have all the lights on, all the heat on, all the air conditioning on a full stack building, and 9 times out of 10 unnecessarily. We are, running an entire building, but we really only need 1 floor today. And so from a carbon footprint perspective, it's a really great opportunity to reduce CO2 emissions and so forth just by reducing heating, cooling, lighting, et cetera. So it's a cool tool, great for sustainability, the human experience, which we care greatly about, and then of course the act of managing real estate in a very dynamic fashion. So I'll leave it at that and just say thank you again for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Regarding that tool, it sounds like a win on several different angles. And yes, thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Kevin, for being part of the conversation today. It's been a great call. So glad that we could do this and have you both here. Just want to wrap up by reminding everyone of the preliminary brief on our study, The Talent Imperative, that we did with Fortune. That's available out on our website. And as a reminder, our next call in this Getting Hybrid Work Right series, we're excited to have Jody Rabinowitz, the head of talent and OD at Zoom, the tool we use for all of these calls and that so many organizations have started using for so many things. She will be joining us to talk about hybrid work at none other than Zoom Corporation itself. So look forward to seeing her and being with all of you again in a couple of weeks. Until then, have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. And again, thank you, Caitlin and Melissa, for all of your insights today. It's been awesome.
And thank you.
Bye.
Hope everybody has a great week. Take care.